The terminal at Miami International Airport was buzzing with travelers rushing past, oblivious to the drama about to unfold. Joshua stepped out of the gate, his eyes sharp, his demeanor focused. He wasn't there for leisure. This was strictly business. But just as he scanned the crowd, he spotted a familiar face, Olivia. She was gripping a young boy's hand, and they both seemed on edge, navigating the airport with a hurried sense of purpose. The sight hit Joshua like a punch to the gut. It had been nearly a decade since he last saw Olivia. Time hadn't dulled the memories. It had only made them sharper, each one filled with regret and unanswered questions. But what shocked him the most was the boy walking beside her. There was something strikingly familiar about him. The dark hair, the sharp eyes, traits that mirrored Joshua's own. His mind raced, flooded with doubts and suspicions. "Olivia," he called out, his voice rough with a mix of surprise and urgency. He pushed through the crowd, his heart pounding. Olivia turned, her face going pale as she recognized Joshua. For a brief second, their eyes met, and a whirlwind of emotions, fear, anger, and a trace of the love they once shared, flashed between them. Panic set in as she tightened her grip on the boy's hand. "We need to go," she whispered urgently to the boy, her voice trembling. Joshua quickened his pace, determined to reach them before they could disappear again. "Olivia, wait," he shouted, the desperation in his voice echoing through the terminal. The boy looked up at Olivia, confusion in his eyes. "Mom, who is that man?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the airport's noise. But Olivia ignored the question. She seemed to be searching for an escape route, her eyes darting around. When Joshua finally caught up to them, he reached out, gently grabbing Olivia's arm. "Olivia, you can't just run away," Joshua said, his tone a mixture of frustration and disbelief. Her eyes flashed with anger as she pulled her arm free. "What are you doing here, Joshua? You have no right to follow us." Joshua's gaze shifted to the boy, then back to Olivia, his voice breaking slightly. "Who is he, Olivia? Is he mine?" Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away, determined to keep her composure. "This isn't the time or place, Joshua," she said coldly. "You need to leave us alone." The boy, sensing the tension, looked up at his mother, his expression a mix of fear and confusion. Joshua knelt down to his level, his voice soft but urgent. "Hey, buddy, what's your name?" The boy hesitated, glancing at Olivia, who seemed torn between pulling him away and letting him speak. "Caleb," the boy finally replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Joshua's heart sank. Caleb, a name he had never heard but one that now seemed to carry the weight of 9 lost years. He looked up at Olivia, his eyes full of pain and unanswered questions. "Is he my son, Olivia?" Joshua asked, his voice raw. Olivia's face hardened, her expression a mask of defiance. "You left, Joshua. You chose your path, and we chose ours. You don't get to come back now and demand answers." Joshua's face fell, a mixture of guilt and determination. "I didn't know, Olivia. I swear if I had known." But Olivia wasn't ready to let him off the hook. "You had your chance, Joshua, and you chose to leave us behind." The tension between them was palpable, each word laced with bitterness and unspoken regret. People around them continued moving, unaware of the unfolding drama. Joshua finally stood up, his eyes locked on Olivia's. "I'm not leaving this time," he vowed. "I need to know the truth." Olivia hesitated, torn between the safety she had created for Caleb and the man who had once been everything to her. "You don't understand, Joshua. It's not just about you and me anymore. There are things you don't know, things that can't be undone." Before Joshua could press further, Olivia took Caleb's hand and began to walk away. "Stay away from us, Joshua," she warned, "for Caleb's sake." But as she disappeared into the crowd, Joshua felt a spark of resolve ignite within him. He knew this was only the beginning, a painful, complex beginning that could lead to either redemption or destruction. "I won't give up this time," Joshua whispered to himself, watching Olivia and Caleb fade into the distance. "I'm going to make things right, no matter what it takes." The heavy humidity of Miami lingered as Joshua sat alone in his rental car, his mind spinning with questions and raw emotions. Caleb. The name felt like both a revelation and a burden. Joshua's heart was torn. If Caleb was indeed his son, he had lost 9 precious years without even knowing of his existence. But Olivia's anger was just as fierce as the guilt that haunted him. The next morning, Joshua found himself outside a modest apartment complex on the outskirts of Miami. After hours of scouring social media, he tracked down Olivia's address. It was a risky move, one that could easily backfire, but he was desperate for answers. He approached the door, his hand hesitating before he finally knocked. The door opened, and there she was. Olivia's eyes were wary, her body tense. She clearly hadn't expected him to find her so quickly. Behind her, Joshua caught a glimpse of Caleb, busy with a set of colored pencils at a small dining table. Olivia stepped outside, closing the door behind her, determined to keep Caleb out of the conversation. "What do you want, Joshua?" Olivia's voice was cold, but there was a hint of vulnerability she couldn't quite conceal. "I want the truth, Olivia. I need to know if Caleb is my son." Olivia's jaw tightened, her eyes flickering with a mix of defiance and pain. "You don't deserve that truth." You walked away without looking back. Joshua's face softened, his voice filled with regret. "I didn't know. I was told you were gone, dead. There was no reason for me to think otherwise." Her eyes flashed with anger. "Gone? Dead? Who told you that? You never even tried to look for me." He stepped closer, his voice pleading. "I was told by people I trusted, people I thought were keeping you safe. I had no idea that you were still alive, and that Caleb existed." Olivia's face crumpled momentarily, revealing the exhaustion she had been carrying for years. "Do you have any idea what it's been like for me? Raising Caleb on my own, always looking over my shoulder." Joshua's chest tightened. "I can't imagine, but I want to make it right, Olivia. I want to be there for him, for both of you." Olivia shook her head, her voice laced with skepticism. "It's not that simple. There are things you don't understand, things that kept me from reaching out to you." "Then explain it to me," Joshua pressed. "I can handle the truth." Olivia hesitated, a heavy silence hanging between them. For a moment, it seemed as if she might open up, but then her eyes darkened with distrust. "I've kept Caleb safe all these years, Joshua. I'm not about to let you come in and disrupt his life just because you suddenly decided to show up." "I understand that," Joshua said softly, "but he deserves to know who his father is." Her voice broke slightly. "And what if that knowledge puts him in danger? There are people who never stop looking for us. They won't hesitate to use Caleb to get to you. That's why I kept him hidden." The weight of Olivia's words settled heavily on Joshua. It was more complicated than he had anticipated. His return had not only stirred up old wounds, but also reawakened dangers he hadn't known existed. "Is that why you ran yesterday? Because you're afraid of these people finding you?" Olivia's eyes filled with tears she tried to hold back. "I'm not just afraid, Joshua. I'm terrified." Joshua's determination grew stronger. "Then let me help. I won't let anything happen to Caleb or to you. I swear it." "You can't just fix this," Olivia said with a mixture of anger and sadness. "You don't know what it's like to live in constant fear, always wondering if today's the day they find us." "But I want to try," he insisted. "I owe you that much, and I owe Caleb everything." A small crack appeared in Olivia's hardened exterior. She rubbed her eyes, exhausted from the years of secrets and the sudden reemergence of a past she thought was buried. "You don't understand how much I wanted to tell you. I wrote you letters so many times, but I was too scared to send them." Joshua's breath hitched. "Letters? You wrote to me?" She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "But I never mailed them. I didn't trust that they wouldn't fall into the wrong hands." Joshua took a step back, absorbing the magnitude of what she had just shared. "Olivia, I never meant for you to be alone in this. I thought I was doing what was best." Her voice grew firmer, tinged with years of accumulated hurt. "But you weren't there, Joshua. You weren't there when I gave birth alone, when Caleb was sick for the first time, when I had to move from place to place to keep us safe. And I want to be there now," he insisted. "Whatever it takes." The front door creaked open, and Caleb's small face peeked out. "Mom?" Is everything okay? Olivia quickly wiped her tears and managed a faint smile. Yes, sweetie. Go back inside, okay? But Caleb's curiosity had been piqued. Who is he, Mom? Why does he look like me? Joshua's heart nearly broke at the innocence of the question. He knelt down, his voice soft but steady. Caleb, I'm someone who wants to help your mom. Someone who cares about you a lot. Olivia took a deep breath, torn between protecting her son and the painful truth she could no longer deny. Caleb, why don't you go get ready for bed? We'll talk later. The boy nodded reluctantly, closing the door behind him. Olivia turned back to Joshua, her voice tired but resolute. I'll let you see him, but on my terms. And if I sense even the slightest danger, you're gone. Joshua nodded, hope finally starting to break through his despair. That's all I ask, Olivia. I just want a chance. As he left, Joshua felt a strange mixture of hope and dread. He was finally on the path to rebuilding what had been lost. But the shadows of the past were still lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. Joshua stood outside Olivia's apartment, a sense of cautious optimism slowly replacing the uncertainty that had settled over him since the unexpected reunion. He had gained a fragile agreement to see Caleb, but it came with an understanding that every step forward would be met with resistance, both from Olivia and the ghosts of their past. He had hoped that finally reconnecting would bring some sense of clarity, but as he drove back to his hotel, a feeling of unease crept into his thoughts. Over the next few days, Joshua tried to integrate himself into Caleb's life as best he could without overwhelming the boy. He was careful, keeping their interactions light and centered around fun activities. A trip to the beach, a simple lunch, or even a walk to the local park. Caleb's natural curiosity kept surfacing, his innocent questions laced with a desire to understand why this new man had suddenly appeared in his life. One afternoon, Joshua took Caleb to a small diner for ice cream. As they waited for their order, Caleb finally asked the question that had been lingering between them. Why did you come here? Did you know my mom from before? Joshua's chest tightened. He searched for the right words, aware of how delicate the moment was. Yes, I knew your mom a long time ago, Joshua replied gently. We were friends, but life took us in different directions. I came back because I wanted to make sure you and your mom were okay. Caleb studied Joshua with a seriousness far beyond his years. Are you going to stay, or are you going to leave again? Joshua's heart ached at the implication. The boy had been abandoned before, and he wasn't about to make the same mistake twice. I don't plan on going anywhere, Caleb. I want to be here, as long as your mom allows it. Before Caleb could respond, Joshua noticed a man sitting alone at a booth across the diner, his eyes fixed on them with an intensity that made Joshua uneasy. The man's demeanor was nondescript. Jeans, a faded cap pulled low over his eyes. But there was something off about his gaze, something that felt intrusive. Joshua's instincts, honed from years of dealing with the darker side of life, flared up immediately. He turned back to Caleb, keeping his voice steady. Hey, buddy, why don't we grab that ice cream to go? Caleb seemed confused but didn't argue. Joshua kept a watchful eye on the man as they made their way to the counter, his mind racing. Was it possible that someone had been following them? Was Olivia right about the danger that still lurked in the shadows? As they left the diner, Joshua spotted the same man getting up and following them out. He tightened his grip on Caleb's hand, quickening his pace without appearing panicked. His heart pounded, the familiar rush of adrenaline kicking in. He led Caleb down a side street, hoping to lose the man in the crowd. But as they turned a corner, Joshua's fears were confirmed. The man was still behind them, maintaining a calculated distance. Joshua stopped abruptly, turning to face the man, his voice firm and unyielding. Why are you following us? The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he smirked, his eyes cold and calculating, just keeping an eye on things, making sure everyone's safe. Joshua's patience was wearing thin. Who sent you? If you have something to say it to me. Leave the kid out of this. The man's smirk widened, a hint of menace in his voice. You really think you can protect them, huh? It's been 9 years, and you're just now deciding to play the hero? Before Joshua could respond, the man stepped back, a mocking tone in his voice. Just remember, Some people don't forget so easily, and neither should you. With that, the man turned and disappeared into the crowd, leaving Joshua standing there, seething with both anger and fear. He knew Olivia's fears were justified. The threats were real, and they were closer than he had imagined. Joshua's mind raced as he guided Caleb back to the apartment, his senses on high alert. He had to tell Olivia about the incident, even if it meant reigniting her anger. She needed to know that the danger they once faced hadn't gone away. It had merely been waiting for the right moment to resurface. Back at Olivia's apartment, Joshua pulled her aside, his voice urgent but low to avoid alarming Caleb, who was busy in another room. "We need to talk, Olivia. I think someone's following us." Olivia's eyes widened with panic, her face pale. "What happened? Did Caleb see anything?" Joshua shook his head. "No, he didn't notice. But it's clear that someone is watching us. We need to be more careful." Olivia's voice was tight, her fear barely contained. "This is exactly what I was afraid of. This is why I never wanted you involved. They won't stop until they get what they want." Joshua's expression was grim. "Then we need to find out who's behind this and why they're still after you and Caleb." Olivia's eyes were filled with a mix of anger and desperation. "Do you really think you can fix this? Do you even know what you're up against?" Joshua's determination was unwavering. "I don't know everything, but I know one thing for sure. I'm not leaving you or Caleb to face this alone." Olivia's shoulders slumped, the weight of years of fear pressing down on her. "We'll have to move again. We can't stay here now that they know where we are." Joshua hesitated. "Running isn't going to solve this, Olivia. We need to confront it head-on." Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes, the fear and exhaustion evident. "And what if confronting it puts Caleb in more danger?" "I can't lose him, Joshua. I can't." Joshua reached out, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "We'll protect him. Together. But we need a plan, and we need to know exactly what we're dealing with." Olivia nodded reluctantly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Then we start tonight. But we do it my way, with no risks to Caleb." Joshua agreed, his resolve stronger than ever. The past had come back to haunt them, but this time, he was determined not to let it win. As night fell over Miami, the air thickened with tension. Joshua and Olivia sat at a small table in her apartment, speaking in hushed tones while Caleb slept in the next room. The dim glow of a single lamp barely illuminated the room, casting long shadows that seemed to mirror the darkness closing in around them. Joshua leaned forward, his voice steady but urgent. "We can't stay here, Olivia. It's too risky. They already know where you live, and that makes you and Caleb vulnerable." Olivia's eyes were weary, filled with a mix of fear and resignation. "And where do you suggest we go, Joshua? We've been running for so long. I'm not sure if there's any place left to hide." Joshua's face was set with determination. "I've arranged for a place on the outskirts. It's a rundown motel, but that's exactly why it's safe. No one would think to look there." Olivia hesitated, glancing toward Caleb's room. "He's finally settled here." "Uprooting him again." Joshua softened, his voice filled with a sincerity that broke through Olivia's defenses. "I know it's not what you wanted, but I can't lose you too. Not again." After a few moments of silence, Olivia finally nodded. "All right, but if things get worse, we do things my way. I won't take any chances with Caleb." The drive to the motel was tense, each passing streetlight casting fleeting glimpses of their anxious faces. Caleb, still unaware of the looming danger, asked casual questions from the back seat, his voice filled with childlike curiosity. "Are we going on a trip, Mom? Is this like an adventure?" Olivia forced a smile, trying to keep her voice light. "Yes, sweetie. It's a little adventure." Joshua's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as he kept checking the rearview mirror. There were no signs of anyone following them, but he knew better than to relax. When they finally arrived at the motel, its neon sign flickering erratically, Joshua instructed Olivia and Caleb to stay in the car while he checked in. The room was basic, almost too basic. Worn carpet, faded curtains, and the faint scent of musty sheets. But it was secure, with only one exit. Joshua made sure the locks were bolted before turning to Olivia, who was trying to comfort a drowsy Caleb on the bed. "It's not much. But it will keep us safe for now, Joshua said, his voice low. Olivia sighed, looking around the small, depressing space. I've lost count of how many places like this we've stayed in, she murmured. Joshua stepped closer, his eyes serious. I know you're tired, Olivia, but we're going to end this. I promise. Later that night, after Caleb had fallen asleep, Joshua and Olivia sat near the window, taking turns keeping watch. The motel was eerily quiet, the only sounds coming from the occasional car passing by. But just as Joshua was about to suggest switching shifts, a soft noise from outside caught his attention. He raised a hand, signaling Olivia to stay quiet. There it was again, a faint rustling, followed by footsteps. Olivia's eyes widened in panic, and Joshua quickly reached for the handgun he had concealed beneath his jacket. Stay with Caleb, he whispered urgently. Lock the door and don't open it unless I say so. Olivia grabbed his arm, her eyes filled with fear. Joshua, don't go out there. It could be a trap. He nodded, understanding the risk. I know, but I can't let them get any closer. Joshua stepped outside, the cool night air hitting his face as he scanned the area. The parking lot was empty, but he could feel eyes watching him. He crept along the side of the building, his senses heightened. Then, without warning, 3 shadowy figures emerged from behind a dumpster, guns drawn. Joshua ducked behind a nearby car just as bullets flew past him, shattering glass and sending debris flying. He returned fire, aiming low to force the attackers back. It was a chaotic blur of gunfire and shouts, and Joshua knew he had to draw them away from the motel room. He made a quick decision, sprinting toward the back of the building, hoping to lure the assailants into a chase. As he ran, he caught sight of one of the men breaking off from the group, heading straight for the room where Olivia and Caleb were hiding. No, Joshua shouted, fear and anger surging through him. He raced back, his mind consumed with the thought of protecting them. Inside the room, Olivia heard the commotion outside. Her body trembled, but her resolve was fierce. She grabbed a metal rod she found near the bed and positioned herself between the door and Caleb, who was now awake, frightened and confused. Mom, what's happening? Caleb's voice was shaky. Olivia forced a calm tone, hiding her terror. It's going to be okay, honey. Just stay behind me, no matter what. Suddenly, the door was kicked open, and one of the attackers burst in. Olivia swung the metal rod with all her strength, catching the man by surprise. He stumbled back, stunned, but quickly recovered, advancing toward them. At that moment, Joshua appeared in the doorway, his gun aimed with deadly precision. Get away from them, he shouted. The intruder hesitated for a split second, but it was enough. Joshua fired, hitting the man in the shoulder. The attacker fell back, clutching his wound, and Joshua moved swiftly, securing the room and ensuring Olivia and Caleb were safe. Olivia's knees buckled with relief, tears streaming down her face. Joshua, breathing heavily, knelt beside her. It's okay, Olivia. It's over. For now. But the relief was short-lived. As Joshua inspected the man's pockets, he found a small piece of paper with an address scribbled on it. It was Olivia's old address, a clear sign that they had been tracked for longer than he had realized. Olivia looked at Joshua, her voice barely audible. They're not going to stop, are they? Joshua's expression was grim. No, they're not. But we won't stop either. The hours that followed the ambush were a blur of urgency and fear. The motel room, once eerily quiet, now seemed to echo with the remnants of chaos. Shattered glass, splintered wood, and the metallic scent of spent bullets. Joshua and Olivia knew they couldn't stay there any longer. As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the wreckage, they packed hastily, gathering their things while Caleb clung silently to Olivia's side. In the car, Caleb was visibly shaken, his young mind struggling to process the violence he'd just witnessed. Olivia reached back, trying to reassure him as Joshua drove through the empty streets, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror. Where are we going? Caleb asked, his voice small and uncertain. Somewhere safer, Olivia answered, her voice soft but filled with determination. Joshua glanced over at her, a silent understanding passing between them. There was no more time for running. The truth needed to come out, no matter how painful. By mid-morning, they reached an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, one of Joshua's old safe houses. It was dusty and cold, but it offered a degree of security they desperately needed. As they settled inside, Olivia led Caleb to a makeshift sleeping area, assuring him that they'd be safe. He eventually drifted off, exhausted from the fear and confusion of the past few days. Once Caleb was asleep, Joshua turned to Olivia, his expression serious. "We need to talk. It's time for you to tell me everything. No more secrets." Olivia's shoulders slumped, and she sank onto a nearby crate, her face drawn and tired. For a moment, she seemed to be battling the urge to keep silent, to protect the very secrets that had shielded Caleb all these years. But Joshua's gaze was steady, unwavering. She finally nodded, knowing there was no turning back. "It all started 9 years ago," she began, her voice filled with a mix of anger and sorrow. "After you disappeared, I was desperate, trying to figure out what had happened. I searched everywhere, but there were no answers. Then, one day, I was approached by a man named Esteban. He claimed to know where you were." Joshua's face tightened at the mention of the name. Esteban was a name he recognized all too well, an enforcer for a notorious cartel he had tangled with in his previous life. "Why didn't you tell me about him before?" Olivia's eyes flashed with a mix of fear and regret. "Because I didn't trust anyone, Joshua. Not after what happened. Esteban told me that you had made a deal with the cartel, that you had betrayed us to save yourself." Joshua's jaw clenched, his voice barely controlled. "That's not true. I was forced to make that deal to protect you and Caleb. I thought they had killed you both." Olivia looked away, tears welling in her eyes. "That's what they wanted you to think. They wanted me to believe you were gone, too. Esteban was using me as leverage to get to you." Joshua's heart sank as he realized the depths of the deception. He had been played, his worst fears used against him, and all along, Olivia had been forced into a dangerous game, one that had put both her and Caleb in constant peril. "Esteban threatened to hurt Caleb if I didn't cooperate," Olivia continued, her voice cracking with emotion. "He said they needed me to deliver information about your movements, that you were still a target for the cartel. I did what I had to do to keep Caleb safe." Joshua took a deep breath, his anger now directed at the faceless enemies who had manipulated them both. "I thought cutting ties with you was the only way to protect you. I thought it would keep you out of their reach." Olivia's eyes were filled with a mix of bitterness and pain. "You didn't protect us, Joshua. You left us exposed. Esteban knew every move I made, every place we tried to hide. He never stopped looking." Joshua's guilt was overwhelming, but he forced himself to focus. "Where is Esteban now? Does he know we're here?" Olivia shook her head slowly. "I don't know. The last time I saw him was 3 months ago. He warned me that you were back in the country and that I needed to cooperate if I wanted Caleb to stay safe." The room fell silent as the weight of Olivia's confession settled over them. Joshua's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the past that had finally come to light. It was a story of betrayal, manipulation, and survival, one that had cost them both dearly. "I swear to you, Olivia, I'm going to fix this," Joshua said, his voice filled with raw determination. "I'm going to find Esteban and end this, once and for all." Olivia's face was a mixture of fear and desperate hope. "I don't know if that's possible, Joshua. He has powerful allies. Even if you manage to find him, it might be too late for us." "It's not too late," he insisted. "We still have a chance. But I need you to trust me this time." Olivia hesitated, then nodded slowly. "I'll try. But if anything happens to Caleb, I won't forgive you. Not ever." Joshua's voice was low but firm. "Nothing will happen to him. I promise." As they sat in the cold, empty warehouse, it was clear that the battle ahead would be more dangerous than anything they had faced before. But for the first time, they were facing it together, united by the need to protect the one person who meant more to them than anything else. As the sun dipped low behind the abandoned warehouse, shadows stretched across the floor, mirroring the sense of unease that gripped Joshua and Olivia. The revelations of the previous night had cracked open a dark reality, one where trust was a scarce resource and enemies lurked in the least expected places. It was time to dig deeper, to find the root of the threat that had torn their lives apart. Joshua paced the cold concrete floor, his mind racing. He knew they needed information, and fast. Olivia sat nearby, her face pale and drawn. The weight of her confession still hung heavy in the air. But there was no time to dwell on regrets. The danger was imminent, and every second counted. "I need to access my company's records," Joshua said suddenly, breaking the silence. "The cartel's reach is wider than I thought, and it's possible they've infiltrated the business." Olivia looked up, confused. "But why would the cartel be interested in your company? I thought this was all about us." "It's not just about us anymore," he replied grimly. "The cartel's interests go beyond revenge. They've likely found something valuable within my organization, something worth manipulating people for." Joshua pulled out his phone and made a call. It was to an old ally, someone he trusted from his security days, a man named Ryan, who had remained loyal through the years, even as Joshua's life spiraled into chaos. "Ryan, I need a favor," Joshua said urgently once the line connected. "I need access to all internal communications within the company for the past year. Everything, emails, financial records, anything that might point to cartel involvement." Ryan's voice was cautious. "You think the cartel's in your backyard?" "I'm certain of it," Joshua replied, his tone steely. "And I need to know who's helping them from the inside." It took hours of waiting, with Joshua and Olivia exchanging anxious glances as the minutes ticked by. Finally, Ryan called back. The news was worse than Joshua had anticipated. "You were right," Ryan said, his voice tense. "I found irregularities in several accounts, including one that's been funding offshore transactions tied to Esteban's network. And it gets worse. It's all linked to someone high up." Joshua's gut twisted. "Who?" Ryan hesitated. "It's your mentor, Joshua. Marcus Turner." The name landed like a bomb in the room. Marcus Turner was more than just a mentor. He was the man who had taken Joshua under his wing when he first entered the world of corporate security. Marcus had taught him everything he knew, had been a father figure after Joshua lost his own. To hear that Marcus might be involved in the conspiracy was unthinkable. "No, that's impossible," Joshua said, his voice barely above a whisper. "He wouldn't betray me like that." But Olivia, watching the scene unfold, wasn't convinced. "You always thought people were better than they are, Joshua. Maybe that's why we ended up like this." Joshua shot her a pained look. "I can't just accept that Marcus is behind this. There has to be another explanation." Olivia's eyes were cold. "You have to face reality, Joshua. The cartel has been playing us from the start. If Marcus is involved, it means they've been in control of everything, even your company." The implications were staggering. Marcus's betrayal meant that the cartel had not only kept tabs on Olivia and Caleb, but had also managed to secure a powerful foothold within Joshua's company. The organization he had built, the one that was supposed to protect people, had become a tool for the very criminals he was trying to escape. Joshua's face hardened with resolve. "We're going to confront him." Olivia's expression was a mix of fear and determination. "Are you sure about this? If Marcus is involved, he won't hesitate to eliminate us if we get too close." "I know," Joshua admitted, "but it's the only way to end this. We need answers, and Marcus has them." Ryan managed to arrange a meeting at a private location, a rundown office building that had once been used for clandestine business negotiations. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions, where deals were made and broken without a second thought. The building was dimly lit, with only a few flickering bulbs casting a pale glow over the narrow hallway. Joshua and Olivia entered cautiously, their steps echoing in the emptiness. Marcus was already there, sitting behind a desk, his face partially obscured by shadows. Joshua felt a mix of anger and betrayal as he faced the man who had once been his mentor. "Marcus, why?" Marcus leaned back, his eyes cold but calm. "Why, Joshua? Because survival is a game, and you're either a player or you're played. You sold us out," Olivia spat, unable to contain her anger. "You put my son in danger." Marcus's gaze flickered briefly to Olivia, then back to Joshua. "I didn't do this out of malice. It's just business. The cartel offered me an opportunity, and I took it." Joshua's fists clenched at his sides. "You were like a father to me. I trusted you. And that's your weakness," Marcus replied evenly. "Trust. You believed in ideals that don't exist. You thought you could protect everything and everyone, but the world doesn't work like that. Joshua's voice shook with rage. You put a child's life at risk for your own gain. How could you? Marcus's face was impassive. I did what I had to do to survive, Joshua. Just like you did when you made that deal years ago. We're not so different. No, we are, Joshua shot back. I did it to protect my family. You did it for power and money. A tense silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of distant traffic outside. Joshua knew he couldn't let Marcus leave without exposing the entire network. Tell me where Esteban is, Joshua demanded. And how deep this goes. Marcus hesitated, a flicker of fear crossing his face. You're too late, Joshua. Esteban is already on the move. He knows you're closing in, and he won't stop until he gets what he wants. What does he want? Olivia asked, her voice filled with desperation. Marcus's expression was bleak. Control. Over you. Over Caleb, and over anyone who stands in his way. Joshua stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. Then we'll stop him, Marcus. And if you're smart, you'll help us. Marcus seemed to consider his options for a moment, then reached into his pocket, pulling out a small flash drive. This is all the information I have. It includes the cartel's movements and Esteban's plans. Why help us now? Joshua asked suspiciously. Marcus's voice was flat, almost resigned. Because I know how this ends, Joshua, and I'd rather be on the right side when it does. With the flash drive in hand, Joshua and Olivia left the building, a new sense of urgency propelling them forward. The drive contained the information they needed, but it also meant the danger was greater than ever. Olivia glanced at Joshua as they walked back to the car, her voice filled with a mixture of hope and fear. Do you think we can really stop him? Joshua's eyes were hard, his resolve unwavering. We have to, Olivia. For Caleb. For all of us. The safe house was eerily quiet as Joshua and Olivia pored over the data from the flash drive Marcus had given them. The small screen of Joshua's laptop glowed in the dim room, casting shadows on their tired faces. Every file they opened revealed more about the cartel's operations, bank transfers, coded messages, and evidence of corrupt alliances that reached far beyond Miami. Joshua's fingers tapped rapidly across the keyboard as he sifted through the information. This is it, Olivia. Everything we need to take down Esteban. Olivia, who had been pacing anxiously, stopped and looked over his shoulder. You really think we can do this? She sounded hopeful, but there was still a layer of doubt. We don't have a choice, Joshua replied, his eyes never leaving the screen. We have to end this now, or it'll keep coming back. Among the files was a document detailing the cartel's next major move, a large shipment of illicit goods coming through the port in 3 days. It was clear that Esteban would be there personally to oversee the operation. This is our chance, Joshua said, his voice low but filled with determination. We take them by surprise at the port. It's risky, but it's the only way to catch Esteban off guard. Olivia's face was pale. And what about Caleb? What happens if something goes wrong? Joshua reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her arm. I won't let anything happen to him, Olivia. I swear it. But it wasn't enough to calm her fears. Olivia pulled away, her voice cracking with emotion. You keep saying that, Joshua, but every time you promise, things just get worse. Joshua's expression softened, his voice filled with regret. I know I failed you before, but I'm here now, and I'm not leaving again. Olivia wiped away a tear, her frustration giving way to vulnerability. How can I trust you, Joshua? How can I let you be a part of Caleb's life when I know there's a chance you might not come back? Joshua's voice was gentle but firm. I understand why you feel that way, but if we don't do this together, we'll never be free from this nightmare. Olivia nodded slowly, her eyes searching his. All right, but this time, we do things carefully. No more recklessness. Agreed, Joshua said, his resolve unwavering. We'll be smart about this. The following day, they met with Ryan in a remote parking lot, where he had arranged for a small team of trusted allies, former military operatives who had experience in high-stakes operations. The team gathered around a makeshift map of the port, going over every detail of the plan. We move in fast and quiet, Ryan explained. Esteban will have his own men there, but we have the advantage of surprise. Our primary goal is to secure evidence and arrest Esteban. Joshua listened carefully, his focus razor-sharp. And what if things go south? Ryan's face was grim. Then we improvise. But the objective remains the same. Get to Esteban before he can slip away. Olivia watched from a distance, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. She hated this. Hated the risk, the danger, the possibility of losing everything. But she also knew it was the only way to end the cycle of fear that had consumed their lives for nearly a decade. As night fell on the day of the operation, the port was shrouded in darkness, illuminated only by the occasional glow of dock lights. Cargo containers loomed like silent giants, their presence both ominous and familiar. Olivia stayed back at the safe house with Caleb, anxiously watching the clock, her heart racing with every passing minute. At the port, Joshua and Ryan moved swiftly, their footsteps silent on the gravel. The team split into two groups, positioning themselves strategically around the loading area. Joshua spotted Esteban near a group of men unloading a container, his presence commanding and confident. Joshua felt a surge of adrenaline. "There he is," he whispered into his earpiece. "I'm moving in." But before Joshua could close the distance, one of Esteban's guards noticed the movement, raising the alarm. Chaos erupted instantly. Gunshots echoed across the port, shouts filled the air, and Joshua found himself caught in a firefight. He ducked behind a stack of crates, returning fire as the cartel's men closed in. Ryan's voice crackled through the earpiece. "We're pinned down on the east side. Need backup." Joshua's mind raced as he tried to regroup, but his focus remained on Esteban, who was making a run for one of the cargo trucks. He couldn't let him escape. Ignoring the danger, Joshua broke cover and sprinted after Esteban. Bullets whizzed past him, one grazing his arm, but he pressed on, his mind solely on capturing the man who had orchestrated so much pain. He reached the truck just as Esteban was about to climb in. Joshua grabbed him, throwing him to the ground. Esteban struggled, but Joshua pinned him, rage and desperation fueling his strength. "It's over, Esteban," Joshua growled, his voice filled with raw emotion. "You're not getting away this time." Esteban sneered, blood trickling from a cut on his lip. "You think this ends here? You have no idea how deep this goes." Joshua's grip tightened. "I don't care how deep it goes. This ends with you." Before Esteban could respond, Ryan and the rest of the team arrived, securing the area and handcuffing Esteban. The operation had been a success, but the danger wasn't over yet. Back at the safe house, Olivia was pacing restlessly when Joshua finally walked through the door, bruised and bloodied but alive. Olivia rushed to him, her face a mixture of relief and anger. "You could have been killed," she said, her voice trembling. "But I wasn't," he replied softly. "And we got him." Caleb, who had been watching from the corner, ran to Joshua, his eyes wide with concern. "Are you okay?" Joshua knelt down, his voice tender. "I'm okay, buddy. I promise." Olivia watched the scene, her heart aching with a mix of hope and fear. She knew that rebuilding trust wouldn't be easy, that the scars of the past wouldn't fade overnight. But as she looked at Joshua and Caleb together, she realized that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. The next morning brought a fragile sense of relief, but Joshua and Olivia knew it was temporary. Esteban's arrest was a major victory, but the cartel's reach was extensive. With Esteban now in custody, there were bound to be power struggles within the organization, and they had to be ready for any retaliation. Joshua's injuries from the port operation were evident. His arm was bandaged, and bruises marked his face. Olivia tended to him in silence, her hands gentle but her expression distant. There were no words that could erase the pain of the past or the uncertainty of the future. But there was something in the air that hadn't been there before, a flicker of hope. "We need to prepare for whatever comes next," Joshua said as Olivia wrapped the last of his bandages. "Esteban's arrest will shake things up, but it also makes us more vulnerable." Olivia nodded, her face set with determination. "I know, but I also know we're not alone anymore." Caleb, sensing the shift in his mother's tone, stepped closer, his small face serious. "Are the bad guys going to come for us again?" Olivia pulled him into a tight embrace, her voice soft but firm. We won't let them, Caleb. We're going to keep you safe, no matter what. Over the next few days, Joshua and Olivia worked closely with Ryan, gathering intelligence on the remaining cartel members and their plans for retaliation. They had managed to intercept several communications indicating that a final strike was being planned, one that would target Joshua, Olivia, and most importantly, Caleb. They want to send a message, Ryan explained during a tense meeting at the safe house. Esteban may be locked up, but his loyalists are desperate to prove their strength. They'll come at you hard. Joshua's jaw tightened, his eyes burning with resolve. Then we make our move before they do. Olivia looked at Joshua, her voice tinged with both fear and courage. Are you sure about this? Going after them directly? It's the only way to end it, he replied, his voice steady. If we let them strike first, we lose the advantage. Ryan nodded in agreement. We have a location on their safe house, an old warehouse on the outskirts of the city. We need to hit them there, fast and hard, before they can mobilize. Olivia's gaze shifted to Caleb, who was playing quietly in the corner, oblivious to the danger that still surrounded them. Her heart ached with both love and fear. I can't let anything happen to him, Joshua. He's been through enough. Joshua stepped closer, his voice low and sincere. I know, Olivia, and that's why we have to do this, so he can finally have a normal life. The plan was set. The team would move in that night, under the cover of darkness. Joshua and Olivia both knew the risks, but there was no other option. They were fighting not just for survival, but for a future free from fear. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Joshua gathered his gear, his movements precise and practiced. Olivia watched him, a mix of admiration and lingering mistrust in her eyes. She had seen this side of him before, determined, focused, relentless. But this time, there was something different. Before they left, Olivia approached Joshua, her voice barely above a whisper. Be careful, okay? I can't lose you again. Joshua's eyes softened, a rare vulnerability breaking through. You won't. I promise. The drive to the warehouse was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Joshua's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his mind clear but heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. He glanced at Olivia, who was sitting beside him, her face pale but resolute. When they reached the warehouse, Ryan and his team were already in position. The building loomed ahead, dark and silent, but Joshua knew it was far from empty. He took a deep breath, his voice steady as he spoke into the earpiece. All teams, move in. The assault was swift and coordinated. Joshua led one of the entry teams, his movements silent and precise. Gunfire erupted as they breached the doors, a chaotic burst of violence that shattered the stillness of the night. The cartel's men were caught off guard, scrambling to defend themselves. In the midst of the firefight, Joshua spotted a familiar face, Hector, Esteban's right-hand man. He was trying to escape through a back exit, but Joshua blocked his path, his gun trained on him. It's over, Hector, Joshua shouted, his voice cold. Hector smirked, raising his hands slowly. You think locking up Esteban means you've won? There are others, Joshua. People you can't even imagine. Joshua's eyes narrowed, his fingers steady on the trigger. Maybe, but you're not one of them. Hector made a sudden move for his gun, but Joshua was faster. He fired a single shot, hitting Hector in the shoulder and bringing him to the ground. As the man writhed in pain, Joshua kicked the weapon out of reach. Outside, Olivia and Ryan were securing the perimeter. The fight was nearing its end, but Olivia's eyes were fixed on the building, her heart pounding with a mix of hope and terror. She couldn't shake the fear that something might go wrong, that Joshua might not make it back. Minutes later, Joshua emerged from the darkness, his face grim but unscathed. Olivia's breath caught, and she ran to him, relief flooding her veins. Is it over? She asked, her voice filled with desperation. Joshua nodded, exhaustion evident in his eyes. It's over. We got them all. Olivia's knees nearly gave way, but she steadied herself, her eyes never leaving his. Thank you, Joshua, for everything. Joshua's face softened, a rare smile breaking through the tension. We did it together, Olivia. This is just the beginning. As they drove back to the safe house, the air felt lighter, the darkness less suffocating. Olivia looked over at Joshua, a warmth in her gaze that hadn't been there for years. "You know," she said quietly, "maybe there's a chance we can start over. For Caleb's sake." Joshua reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. "I'd like that, more than anything." For the first time in years, there was a sense of possibility, a glimpse of the life they had once dreamed of, now within reach. As dawn broke over Miami, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink, the city seemed almost serene, an odd contrast to the chaos of the past few days. Joshua, Olivia, and Caleb were back at the safe house, which now felt more like a refuge than a temporary hiding place. The threat that had haunted them for nearly a decade had been dismantled, at least for now. But the scars remained, and the journey ahead was uncertain. Joshua stood on the small porch, gazing into the distance. His face was lined with exhaustion, but there was a sense of relief beneath the fatigue. Olivia stepped out quietly, wrapping her arms around herself against the cool morning air. She watched Joshua, noticing the way he seemed both distant and present, like a man finally free but unsure of where freedom would lead him. "You're up early," she said softly. "Couldn't sleep," he replied, a hint of a smile on his lips. "Too much to think about." Olivia moved closer, her voice tentative. "What happens now, Joshua? With us?" He turned to face her, his eyes filled with a mix of hope and uncertainty. "I want to make things right, Olivia. For real this time. No more running, no more secrets." Olivia's eyes softened, her voice breaking slightly. "It's not that simple. There's still so much hurt, so much to rebuild. But I want to try. For Caleb's sake, and maybe for us too." Joshua nodded, his gaze steady. "I know it won't be easy, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I've made too many mistakes, but losing you and Caleb again isn't something I can bear." In the days that followed, the safe house became a temporary home as Joshua and Olivia navigated their new reality. Caleb sensed the shift, his usual wariness beginning to fade. There was laughter now, hesitant at first, but real. Joshua spent time teaching Caleb how to ride a bike in the parking lot, and Olivia found herself smiling more often, the shadows of the past gradually lifting. One afternoon, as Olivia watched Caleb and Joshua playing catch in the yard, she felt a strange sensation. Something like hope, mixed with the cautious joy of someone who had been hurt too many times before. She walked over, her steps slow but purposeful. "You two look like you're having fun," she said, a genuine warmth in her voice. Caleb ran over, beaming. "Mom, Dad's teaching me how to throw like a pro." The word hit Joshua with unexpected force. He hadn't been called that, Dad, since his life had spiraled into darkness years ago. He knelt down, his voice filled with emotion. "You're doing great, champ." Olivia watched them, her heart full but fragile. There were no guarantees, no promises that the past wouldn't resurface or that the dangers were truly gone. But for the first time, there was something solid beneath the uncertainty, a foundation, however small, on which they could build. A week later, as the legal proceedings against Esteban and his associates began, Joshua met with law enforcement officials, providing testimony and evidence. The trial would be long and grueling, but it was the final step in ensuring their safety. When Joshua returned to the safe house that evening, Olivia was waiting for him. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice filled with both concern and curiosity. "It went well," he replied, sitting beside her. "We've got enough to keep Esteban behind bars for a long time. It's finally over, Olivia." She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "And what about us, Joshua? Is it over for us too?" Joshua reached for her hand, his touch gentle but sincere. "No, Olivia. It's just beginning. I want to rebuild everything I lost, everything we lost. But I need you to meet me halfway." Olivia's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of relief, not despair. "I'm here, Joshua. I'm ready to try, one step at a time." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of the past finally lifting as the warmth of a new beginning settled in. There would be challenges ahead, trust to rebuild, wounds to heal, but there was also a chance for something they hadn't dared to hope for in years, a future. As night fell, Joshua and Olivia stood together, watching Caleb chase fireflies in the yard. The darkness was no longer filled with fear, but with the quiet promise of redemption. Caleb ran up to them, his eyes wide with excitement. "Look, Mom. Look, Dad. I caught one." Joshua and Olivia exchanged a look, a silent, unspoken understanding that this was their second chance, one they wouldn't let slip away. "You did great, buddy," Joshua said, his voice filled with pride. "And so did we." And for the first time in nearly a decade, they believed it. They had fought, they had endured, and now, they had finally found a way back to each other. This time, they were ready to hold on. 2 years had passed since the night that changed everything. Joshua, Olivia, and Caleb had settled into a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Miami, far removed from the chaos and danger that once defined their lives. It wasn't the most glamorous place. A small, 2-bedroom house with an old swing set in the backyard and a creaky front porch. But to them, it was a haven. Joshua stood on that same porch one bright morning, the rising sun casting a golden hue over the lawn. He sipped his coffee slowly, taking in the simple beauty of the scene before him. The backyard was dotted with Olivia's carefully tended flowers, a colorful splash of life in the corners of the once neglected garden. Caleb was playing with his soccer ball, practicing kicks against a wooden fence that Joshua had reinforced after it almost collapsed under one of Caleb's earlier attempts. A proud smile spread across Joshua's face as he watched his son. Caleb's body had grown stronger, more agile. There was no trace of the frailness that once lingered in his demeanor. His laugh was loud and carefree, a stark contrast to the hesitant, fearful voice Joshua remembered from 2 years ago. Inside, Olivia was preparing breakfast, pancakes, as was now the Saturday morning tradition. The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and maple syrup, a comforting aroma that filled the small house. She paused for a moment, glancing out the window above the sink, catching sight of Joshua watching Caleb with that familiar look of love and gratitude. It was a look she had come to cherish, one that had replaced the guilt and regret that used to cloud his eyes. Joshua felt Olivia's presence even before she stepped onto the porch. He turned to her, his smile widening as she joined him, 2 mugs of freshly brewed coffee in hand. She handed him one and leaned against the railing beside him, her hair still slightly damp from her morning shower. She looked at Caleb, a soft smile touching her lips. "He's really getting better," she said, nodding toward their son. Joshua nodded. "He's got heart. He's determined." Then, with a teasing tone, he added, "But he's stubborn. He gets that from you." Olivia rolled her eyes playfully. "He gets that from both of us, and you know it." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, sipping their coffee, watching Caleb celebrate a well-placed kick. The scene felt surreal to Joshua, a normal family morning, filled with the mundane beauty of everyday life. He hadn't imagined he'd get to experience this again, let alone with Olivia and Caleb by his side. He turned to her, a question lingering in his gaze. "Do you ever wonder how we actually made it here?" he asked softly. Olivia's face turned serious, her eyes thoughtful. "All the time," she admitted. "There were days I didn't think we would. Days when I thought the fear would never let us go." She paused, then added, her voice firmer, "But we did make it, Joshua. We built this life, piece by piece. And for once, it feels like it's truly ours." Joshua's eyes shone with emotion. "I want to make it even better, Olivia. For you. For Caleb. For us." Olivia met his gaze, her expression a mixture of vulnerability and hope. "You already have, Joshua. More than you know." Before he could respond, Caleb's voice broke through the moment, urgent and excited. "Mom, Dad, watch this." They both looked up just in time to see Caleb kick the ball into a small makeshift goal Joshua had set up. Caleb jumped in the air, fists pumping. "I scored," he shouted, beaming with pride. Joshua and Olivia exchanged a smile, one filled with a warmth that spoke of promises kept and wounds that were slowly healing. "You did great, buddy," Joshua called out, his voice filled with pride. Olivia nudged Joshua playfully. "Better watch out. He's going to be better than you soon." Joshua laughed, his eyes bright. "I hope so." Later that afternoon, the family gathered around the small kitchen table for lunch. The meal was simple, grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, but it was filled with conversation and laughter. Caleb recounted a funny story from school, his voice animated, his eyes shining with joy. Olivia and Joshua listened intently, occasionally exchanging amused glances over Caleb's exaggerated expressions. After lunch, Caleb ran back outside to play, leaving Joshua and Olivia alone in the small, cozy living room. Olivia reached out, taking Joshua's hand in hers, her fingers warm and familiar. "I never thought we'd have this again," she said quietly, her voice full of emotion. Joshua's gaze was steady, his voice soft but strong. "I never stopped hoping for it, Olivia. Even when things seemed impossible, I always believed we'd find our way back." Olivia nodded, tears welling up in her eyes, but they were tears of relief, not sadness. "You were right," she whispered. "We did find our way back." As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the room, Joshua and Olivia sat together, a sense of peace finally settling over them. There were still challenges ahead. Life wasn't perfect, and they both knew that old wounds could resurface. But now, they faced those challenges together, their bond stronger than it had ever been. Outside, Caleb continued to play, his laughter echoing in the yard. He was a boy free from fear, surrounded by the love of parents who had fought to give him a life they themselves had once only dreamed of. And as Joshua and Olivia watched him from the window, they knew they had earned every bit of this happiness. It wasn't the fairy tale ending they had imagined years ago. It was better. It was real, forged through pain, courage, and unwavering love. It was a new beginning, and this time, they were ready to face whatever came next, together.